Thanks, everybody, for joining today. Welcome to the TrojAI webinar series. We are today going to talk about the 2025 RSA conference. My name is Lee Weiner. I'm the CEO of TrojAI. I typically host this webinar, and today we have a guest, Christian Falco. Christian, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Haley, thanks for having me. Christian Falco, I manage our strategic partnerships at TrojAI. Long-time cybersecurity person and excited to be in the AI security space now.
Yeah, so I think this will be a fun session, Christian. We were both at RSA, so we'll get into it. If anyone has either questions, but even more so like comments, if you went to RSA and you want to comment on kind of what your experience was, that would be great. You can just drop it in the Q&A and we can chat about that as well. But we've got a few things we'll talk about today, Christian. I think we can start with talking a little bit about keynotes and themes, and then we can get into the vendor dynamic, the exhibitor floor, which is always a big part of RSA. And then we'll talk about one of the themes I think that's typically important to us, which is AI and how AI impacted the conference. And we'll end with some fun stuff maybe at the end. So let's just dive into it. I think, there's always a lot of keynotes at RSA. The way that RSA typically structures these keynotes is they've got some that are vendor driven. So, and we'll talk about that kind of stuff later. But there's always a handful of like larger, more thematic keynotes. And I don't know, Christian, I was going to mention two of them that are pretty interesting. One which was kind of more fun than the other one was a little more serious. But the fun one was with Magic Johnson. So I don't know if people know, but Magic Johnson did a keynote. He's a fantastic speaker if you've never seen him speak. In fact, I would suggest, I think if you do like a Magic Johnson TED Talk search, you'll get a bunch of his talks that were similar to this one. But his was fun. It wasn't really about cybersecurity, actually. It was about leadership. He told some really great stories. He talked a lot about like committing to your craft, which I think in the field of cybersecurity is super important, obviously, and giving it like your all and 150%. He talked a lot about actually self-awareness, which I also think in cybersecurity and in any leadership position is important. But even as like no matter what you're doing in cybersecurity, I think being aware of your skills and your capabilities is really, really important. He told everyone to do a SWOT assessment on themselves, which I've definitely done. I do it sometimes with our board actually, because you should be real about where you're good and where you're not. And so yeah, that was a really good one. I don't know, Christian, I don't think you saw that one. Did you see
No,
that?
I didn't get to see it. I kind of saw the highlights, but yeah, I mean, I think it was like good sentiment on leadership and driving self-awareness through things like you said, like a SWOT analysis. I mean,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to be said too, right? Like we're an early stage company. I think we kind of have to go in with that mindset every day that we need to do what it takes. So I just thought it was good to hear from Magic Johnson. I don't know if you caught that he did a chest bump with someone
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I
out as
saw.
well.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, I wonder what it'd be like to be on the receiving end of
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And we're our company. We operate out of Canada, but we also have an office in Boston, Massachusetts. So I'm a lifelong Celtics fan, but I respect the Lakers significantly, and Magic Johnson's awesome. So, yeah, no, it was great. I think a lot of people were chatting about it. I think the one that was probably a little more interesting thematically for the conference, and definitely more serious, was Bruce Schneier's keynote. So Bruce Schneier is a longtime researcher, cryptographer. I'm pretty sure. I think the first RSA I went to was in 2000 or 2001, and it was at the San Jose Conference Center back then, and it was very small. And Bruce Schneier gave a keynote at that too, and it was about cryptography. I mean, this was 25 years ago. I do not remember that keynote, but I did look up that event, and it was a very different event than it is today. But Bruce has been super influential in the industry. He always has very, very interesting things to say. And his was all about, like, a lot about AI safety, AI security, AI governance, and AI risks and ethics, a very strong sense of ethics. He tends to send a very strong message to the industry, kind of warning of like potential harm, which I think, here at TrojAI, we're very focused on this subject. So it was very relevant. I think it was very relevant to the times in the audience for sure. He also talked about regulation, which there was a decent amount of chatter about, but he talked about the EU AI Act quite a bit and the impact that could have, um, and the need, really a strong message around the need for regulation and the need for trust and the need for safety. It was really good. There hasn't, I looked up to see if you could like find the transcript. Oftentimes he publishes his transcripts online. I'm sure he will. So if you didn't see it, I would highly suggest like checking it out.
Yeah, I mean, tech and policy, like it's right in his wheelhouse, right? Like he's been talking about these things forever. I think AI amplifies this a lot. As we know, AI is non-deterministic, it's unprecedented, it's a black box, so that can lead to a lot of different risks if not regulated. A lot of issues around fairness and safety and trust and transparency. So, this is the space we're in, so we get it a little bit more, but it's great to see, like someone like Bruce Schneier speaking about this on a big stage at
Yeah,
RSAC.
it was awesome. Yeah, and Christian, I know you saw a couple others that I didn't see. You mentioned to me on the way back about like this theme around community.
Yeah, yeah, it was good. Yeah, so Hugh Thompson kind of opened up the whole thing, and RSA's central theme was community. And I was reflecting on it a little bit because, like at 50,000 foot level, there's a lot of community in InfoSec in general, right? Like we're all kind of going up against a common foe, and that's the adversary. And it's also the malicious insider. But there is a lot of community in just kind of serving that purpose. And then as you kind of go into the weeds of it, there's a lot of community that happens within different organizations that are doing security, whether that's bringing your security and your IT and your GRC teams together. Interestingly, in our space of AI security, we're seeing more and more teams across the orgs come together to address this problem. We're working with AppSec teams and CloudSec teams and data science teams and AI security teams, right? So all these different teams that are now coming together, like collaborating and building community, I think is interesting. On the AI front, from a macro level, we're seeing a lot of, public and private partnerships around this. There's a lot of stuff going on in the EU with the current AI. Um, if you don't know what that is, you guys should check it out. France and a lot of these EU countries are driving some really strong, AI landscape evolving funding to drive some new AI initiatives. They're bringing in a lot of, top tier vendors around that as well. And my background, I come from threat intel. I managed a threat intel product, probably 10 years ago. We worked very heavily with the community. We worked with ISACs. Like it's just good to kind of see these themes that keep coming up, and working in security. Just this idea of, building community, working together, solving the same problem. And that's, at Troj, that's what we're trying to do, right? With
Yeah,
companies is collaborate with them and build community to help address these problems. And worth noting, Lee, like, we saw who won the sandbox Project Discovery, right? They're like
yeah,
open source based, like a lot
yes,
of community there solving problems that have existed around like vulnerability and
yeah,
those
yeah,
issues for 20 plus years, right? So like I just kind of like walked away. I was
yeah.
like, yeah, community makes sense here.
Yeah, no, I think it's yeah, super interesting. I think you're right about yeah, for those that don't know, RSA runs something called the Innovation Sandbox every year. They look at companies that are doing interesting things, and this year's winner was a company called Project Discovery, which is a vulnerability, like an almost like an open source vulnerability analysis solution. Really interesting. But yeah, I think to your point about community, the other thing just to say, and I think Hugh Thompson was trying to reflect on this, is like, look, RSA has definitely become a place where people like to go to that are in the cybersecurity community to just like hang out with each other. Like most people that go that have been in the industry for a while, it is a place where you run into or meet up with either like, former colleagues, current colleagues, people you wanted to connect with that you haven't been able to connect with. And like, I think it is like a really receptive place to do that. It's whether and it's like you might see somebody on the street, you might see somebody in a session, and there's always really good connections made, and it is like an open and dynamic place. So I think that is also was like reflective of the just what this thing has become. I think 46,000 people went this year,
Yeah.
which is kind of amazing. I think it is the largest cybersecurity conference on the planet. Black Hat is not this big. I guess DEF CON might be larger, but it's a slightly different group of people. But But yeah, I think your point about community is really, really interesting. All right, so let's move to the let's talk a little bit about the thing that a lot of people talk about, which is like the exhibit floor at RSA. So like, vendors exhibiting at RSA. I think there was over 600 this year, something like that. I don't remember the exact number. It has encompassed like multiple halls at the Moscone Center. It used to just be in one. Now it's like across the entire thing. It takes a while to walk the whole thing. Um, I think, it was a very, AI is on the front of everyone's mind, right? For sure. And I think that was reflective when you walked around the exhibit floor. AI was everywhere. I think the biggest area you see AI today is like we talk a lot about this at TrojAI a lot. Is like, is it AI for security or is it security for AI? And there's a lot of AI for security there, right? So the big ones that I think I saw that were interesting was really around leveraging AI for things like the Security Operations Center, AI in the SOC, kind of AI leveraging your SIM, those kind of things. There's also a lot of like, I saw a lot of identity overlay with AI where if you think about and I guess the similarities between these two things is like it's a lot of data, right? The SOC is a lot of data if you're trying to detect and analyze threats and attacks, but also given identity sprawl, especially with cloud infrastructure, there's a lot of data. So I saw those two things like pretty predominantly. We can get to the security for AI thing in a minute, but any would you see, Christian?
Kind of the same. Yeah, AI for security definitely pretty rampant, right? A lot of agent use cases there in the SOC, a lot of vendors, SOC tools building out different types of agents, for different use cases. Starting to hear more about marketplaces popping up where other vendors can, contribute and build agents for different SOC tools. It kind of feels like traditional app marketplaces are now going this way of agent use cases, which are very focused on tasks to be done and automation in the SOC. So I definitely saw that in the SOC. Totally agree with you around identity. I think identity has been a really interesting space over the last few years. That idea around posture management and permission and credential sprawl, especially as you're now moving to like a lot of service accounts and non-human identities and APIs and bots, like that is something the AI space we're going to see more of with the identity picture. So I totally agree with those. The other space I saw, Lee, I don't know if you saw this on the floor, was like data security and AI governance. Like that was definitely something that was popping up a lot. And I think, we think about too as just being part of this larger, like how to secure AI front. I mean, if you think of, DSPM vendors, what they've done to kind of like disrupt traditional data security and getting into new environments like SaaS and IaaS and PaaS, and now the AI space, and there's a lot of discovery and classification disruption going on, and next gen DLP, really having a good footprint on like, what data is going into my models, who has access to that data, what's the lineage of that data, like understanding everything that's touching and where that data is going before it even kind of gets into like the model. Like that's becoming very important. And there's a lot of impacts on like AI regulatory around that. Like, is my data compliant? What data is going into that? Is it GDPR compliant? Is it, HIPAA compliant? That type of stuff. So I think that'll continue to have a really strong seat at the table for the AI security discussions. And like you said, like a lot of this is a data story at the end of the day. So I definitely saw a lot of like data security and AI governance.
Yeah, I think to your point about agents, I think we did hear a lot about like security agents,
Yeah.
like our people, and we actually did a webinar a few months ago with a company that's building security agents just to talk about agentic like architectures. Generally, we use that as an example. But yeah, there was a lot of talk about like creating security agents, what they can do for you. I think there's a whole other conversation we can have about what an agent is and what agentic AI is. But I think security is a good use case for it for sure, right? If you think an agent is a task, something that delivers a kind of a task to be done, security is a great problem that needs to be solved, and agentic AI could help solve that problem. And so there was a good amount of like discussion about that. I would say the other thing, just to comment on, like generally with the expo floor, I think that we're a cybersecurity vendor too, so like we all are trying to navigate this dynamic. It's really loud, and it's sometimes hard to distinguish. I do think there's a lot of small vendors doing super interesting things. And so, it's tough at a place like RSA to kind of get to those like outreaches of the floor because the large vendors kind of occupy the space, which makes sense. I get why they do that. I've worked for some of those vendors. But there is a lot of interesting innovation happening, in like, automation and threat detection and threat research in some of these smaller vendors. So, I always try to get to those parts of the floor and kind of see what's happening. So anybody that goes or is planning on going next year, go check out those folks. And
Did you see the baby goats?
so yeah, so what was going on with this? I read a couple things about animals
Yeah.
and like concerns about animals. And then there was another thing I read about that was about just some marketing tricks that worked. But no, what happened with the baby
Yeah,
goat?
there was like a little goat petting zoo.
Where seriously?
Yeah,
I
there was.
really didn't know this. We did not
Yeah.
rehearse this part. Like I didn't know
Mhm.
any of that.
There
Seriously?
was, yeah.
Oh
There
wow.
was. Yeah, I mean there's nothing better than like going down the Moscone stairs, like you said, 46,000 people, 600 booths, and like taking a left and running into like a goat petting booth. So that's
I
RSA,
missed
right?
that.
Yeah.
We don't need to name names, but
No.
I'm curious about who was the one that how did they get like you get into like how did you get approval from the city of San Francisco? Maybe they didn't. I don't know.
Yeah.
The other thing was that I was commenting with some of my friends about the similar dynamic around the event. There's a lot of marketing around the event, of course, understandably. And there was like this year, the first time I had seen like a vendor with a jingle, like there was like a truck that went by that was like they got a jingle created. I will say it was a little bit like, you might be like, oh, that's kind of annoying. But I will say that like it was in my head for 2 hours. So apparently it sort of worked.
Yeah.
The jingle. I did look up that company. So I guess mission accomplished from that. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about security for AI. This is an area that's very close to us. We are a security for AI company. I think the thing that was a little different this year than last year, just generally, is that there's been more adoption of AI in enterprises and organizations for sure. And look, the audience for RSA is both the industry people like us and practitioners and chief security officers and threat researchers and all those people are there. And so I think there was a lot more kind of discussion about the implications of risk. And I think we did see some frameworks out recently. OWASP has updated their top 10 for LLMs. They actually have released agentic AI security framework as well. And then the Cloud Security Alliance just published a draft of some work, a controls matrix. So I don't know. It seemed to me, and then you had kind of the dynamic we talked about earlier with Bruce Schneier talking about regulations. It felt to me like, security for AI, and again, we're in the middle of this market, so we talk to customers about this all the time, but it did feel more front and center. I don't know what you thought, Christian.
Yeah, no, totally. I think it's something that, enterprises we're almost past like kicking the tires, right? It seems that AI projects are happening and they are building apps and agents on different types of LLMs, multiple LLMs, right? It can be. So I think it's starting, to hit that, security is something that's important and needed for these types of use cases. So I definitely think we saw a flurry of, AI security positioning in our space from both, large players and small players, right? So I think it's something that picked up steam. One thing I picked up on was like, securing agentic AI is definitely a top thing. I know we talked about agents a little bit earlier, but that was more in the SOC. It's been interesting, kind of this evolution of how people are thinking about like going from like a traditional Gen AI app, which we say traditional, but this is what, like 12 months ago.
Yeah.
A Gen AI app now to more like agentic workflows where a Gen AI app might be, something on an LLM app that might be a little bit more open-ended, like a customer service app, that you can, trained on an FAQ that you can ask like, what's your return policy or something like that. And then you bring in this idea of agentic, which brings a little bit more task and job to be done into it, breaks things into subtasks. You've got a return agent, for example, help me process this return. And then you bring in this like agent to agent conversation, which is like, your return agent is now talking to your, address validation agent. And I think what's interesting for us is one, that's complicated. And we kind of love that. Like there's a lot of different checks and gatekeeping that need to happen to keep this whole process secure, right? Checks that are required for the models that these apps and agents are running on, to make sure that we understand the behavior of those models, that they're not vulnerable to like bias and misinformation and different types of security vulnerabilities as well. And also just kind of like, building in, monitoring and protection gates along the way. Like what types of prompts are going to through these agents, through these applications to the models, what's coming back from those. So the space of, securing AI, it's still very much founded in both testing but also kind of protecting and monitoring these. It's now just amplified with these new workflows that are coming through agentic AI, and then you bring in things like MCP, which is infrastructure that brings all this stuff together. So it's getting more complicated, but I think enterprises are realizing like these are the things that they have to do to kind of build these new type of like outcomes that can optimize their use cases. So for
Yeah.
us, it's listening and understanding and seeing how the use cases evolve, but you know, basically taking how we approach or address AI security and bringing it to these new use cases. So
Yeah.
my big takeaway, like agentic is happening, agentic workflows are happening, but it just kind of like amplifies something that is already grounded in like the foundation of addressing
Yeah.
AI.
No, we definitely heard a lot. I mean, there was definitely a lot of people talking about agentic AI for sure. The other thing, and that I think was interesting, you and I wound up kind of in a bunch of conversations about this, maybe given our business, but um, I ran into more people that are either wanting to or actually red teaming AI models, right? And I think that it's like for someone, it's interesting, right? Because I spent a bunch of time earlier in my career working on things like the Metasploit framework and like traditional pen testing, which is super valuable and super important. I think that it's interesting to talk to red teamers about how they think about doing this. And there was a bunch of red teamers there, actually more than I would have thought. Like, I think a lot of those people tend to go to DEF CON and Black Hat. They will definitely do that this year, I'm sure. But there was more discussion of red teaming, um, uh, which was fascinating. And you and I had a chance to have dinner with a few red teamers one night, which was awesome. We had a lot of great conversations about like how you think about that and what kind of skills you need. But I thought that was like a distinct difference. Last year, I don't think I even heard anyone talking about red teaming AI at all. Maybe that's not fair, but there was very little talk of it. And this year, it was like, again, we're sort of in it, but I ran into more of it than I expected.
Yeah, I totally agree. We were getting questions about it, more interest from, honestly, from, some people and organizations that I didn't even think would be interested in this type of stuff.
Right.
So I
Right.
think it just shows you that, this space is evolving and, this is being considered a way to kind of address this. And, I think if you think about traditional DevSecOps for like applications that are, built using code, like AI brings a new, dynamic to this, right? Where it's not just code based, you have weights, you have behavior that needs to be validated. Like it's starting to kind of move into that, that AppSec, CloudSec landing where it's becoming part of, that picture to make sure that these things are thoroughly, tested and secured. So, if that's the direction this is going, it's great. I mean, I think just the fact that we're getting more and more questions about it and interest is good for the space and good for, securing AI.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so we just got a comment slash question about, one of the big things at RSA. I think there's not like a website dedicated to this. Is like there's a zillion parties you can go to. I mean, there's probably like 50 or 60, maybe even more than that. What did we, Christian, was there like one that you thought was really good that you went to?
Um, I'll shout out our friends at CSA because we
The
like
Cloud Security Alliance.
we love Cloud
Yeah,
Security Alliance over here. We attended their little shindig. I thought that was fun. They also have good audience there, right? Like there's good conversations, a lot of CISOs over there, so you kind of get to kind of talk to them and see how things are going for them, and talk about things outside the floor. I actually met a CISO based out of the UK, and I ran some potential vacation plans by him for later
nice,
this summer. So,
nice.
those are the types of things that happen off the floor.
Yeah,
But yeah, that was a good one for me. I don't know. Lee, did you have a
yeah.
good
Yeah,
one?
yeah, that was a good one. I went to this event. There was an investor, a venture capital firm that did some events at the I think it's the Children's Museum, right? Like it's like if you walk out of Moscone and kind of go across the street like to the Yerba Buena Garden, you go up these stairs. It looks like there's like a carousel up there, but there's like a little museum back there, and they had a whole bunch of events. They had like every day they had something there, but I went to one of those and it was like a nice, because the other thing about some of these events is like you go to them and there's like a ton of people there and you can barely move, whether you want to get something to eat or drink. Like that's even irrelevant to the stories. Like you can't even move around. But this one was like really good space, really good people. They had indoor outdoor space, which I thought was good. The weather was good all week, right? It didn't rain, I don't think. Yeah, the weather was good all week. And so that one was like it was just a good it was a good vibe. It was a good like you had like a good space to be in. That was good. The other thing that you and I both went to is like we have a couple partners, some of which do this thing where they like rent out a whole like restaurant for the week, and then you can kind of cut like if you have a meeting there, sometimes they'll like let you just go there and like hang out in between sessions or something and do some work. I highly recommend if you can find one of those, like if you're a customer of one of those people, like get involved so you can have a place to land when you want. I
Yeah.
thought that was pretty good. They have food there and stuff.
Yeah.
That whole thing has really evolved. Like 5, 10 years ago, there wasn't a lot of that. Now there's like all these vendors are basically renting out all of these restaurants around Moscone. And if you're a customer of theirs or a partner of theirs, you can maybe use it. And that can be super fun. All right, last thing we'll hit on, and then we'll wrap up. Christian, how many steps did you get?
I checked my Fitbit. I think I averaged 16 plus per day, 16,000.
16,000? Yeah,
And
yeah,
my top out was Wednesday. I cleared 20. So
yeah. Yeah, it was similar. I think I didn't have as many average. I think my average was more like 14, but I did on Wednesday clear 18,000. It's like, it's just, even if you were to just say, like, I'm going to go to the sessions and the exhibit floor, you'd be hard pressed to do any less than 10, 12,000. But then once you get into like, oh, I have a meeting, across the street, or I'm going to have lunch with these people, like all of a sudden it's like, yeah. Oh, one other thing we didn't talk about that I'm going to definitely make sure to mention is like, I'd be curious to know if anyone has an answer to this before we go that's on still. How many Waymos did you take? Or did you even get in a Waymo? I guess that's maybe the bigger question. You did. I know you did because I was with you
yeah,
on at least
I
one
took
of
a
them.
couple. They were
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I'm curious if anybody on the
Yeah. The Waymos were like, I think there's a whole other conversation. I think they're amazing and I think they work really well. It's the thing that happens though around Moscone, it's so busy during RSA, and like the amount of like times Waymos get honked at is like hilarious in some ways because there's nobody in these vehicles. Now maybe they're aware of audibles and they can sort of like deal with it, but they definitely hesitate at massive high traffic locations. But if you're just like cruising around San Francisco, they're fantastic. Fantastic.
very cool. I took some videos inside, sent them back to my family in
Yeah,
Boston.
yeah.
So
The other tip that I got last time I was in San Francisco is sit in the front. If it's just you, sit in the front. Like, why not? There's no driver, just sit in the front. It's great. All right. Well, hey, Christian, this was great. It was a good RSA as usual. Looking forward to next year. We'll be at Black Hat too. So maybe we'll do one of these after Black Hat. And thanks for joining everybody today. Christian, thanks for taking the time.
all right, thanks, Lee.
All right. We'll see you.